free to chew during the talk and enjoy. Clicker clicking. Clicker is not always clicking before. All right, we'll try it that way. I'm Jordan Hirsch, Director of Innovation at Phase 2, we're a digital experience agency.
I'm Rebecca Fanning, Director of UX.
And we are talking about people at the center of personalization because personalization implies change, right? Scaling up the personalization effort at an organization will mean changes in the ways people work together, changes in the ways that people get measured for success, changes in the ways that you understand and communicate with your customers, and all of that change needs to be managed carefully. There's a lot of talks here you're going to see this week about technology and tools and understanding your customer, but all the technology in the world will not help you if you're not bringing your own people along with you on this personalization journey at your organization. We're also talking about it because it has an actual business impact. Studies have shown there's actually a very high correlation between investing in the employee experience and great customer experience, right? These things are highly correlated together. Companies with more engaged employees really do have better customer experiences. So there's a definite, clear relationship between how we treat ourselves internally to organizations and how we treat our customers.
Great. So before we get started in our first activity, we're just lay a little ground rules. So we're going to follow Chatham House rules. If anybody knows what this is, I'll be super impressed. If you're going to be British or English, you'll know what this location means. But in essence, we're going to be sharing some stories, and the ground rules are keep it confidential. So pretty much you can remove names, keep them anonymous, and you can share these stories, but no attribution to organization or specific roles. And really, this is just to help us facilitate a more open, communicative dialogue. So the first thing we're going to ask you is to take a minute and think about what was the worst experience you've ever had with stakeholders. Just take a minute, maybe write it down, think about it.
And you can use a broad definition of the term stakeholder, really any time that you had to work with someone else.
Or a group of people to get something done. And so, now that you've thought about it, we'd like you to get into groups of 3 and 4 and take about 5 to 10 minutes and share that experience with each other.
Cool.
Cool. Think of one, did you?
Begin.
Well, begin.
I can think of several.
I know, right?
So I think I can think of basically when people already knew what they were going to do. They already had their preconceived ideas, like the state way it should go last week. And yeah, that's fine if you're telling me about the data that I present. Yeah, but when I do it this way, I already have
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Sure. How did it evolve? Very similar to work. The idea of the concept was thought of ahead of time, and then I'm a developer, so
It was an interesting
bringing the idea to developers.
I mean, he was a senior VP.
So mine would be, we just went through, then along the way as we're creating innovation, and then
I'm assuming their organization is very
find out about the rework done already. I found out about we were working to work this way. We were the executives back, so we got to keep going through something. And I didn't know that's an issue with marketing. So imagine the marketing department being leadership. This helped out a lot, but
it's still really hard for people to know what they already have.
But we can keep going out. I don't know if it's the worst, but
And that's what it's really
difficult. Leadership is hard after leadership. Very interesting. Looking back, they got to go through the moment and have a conversation.
Change is hard.
Because I was new, so I didn't have as much investment.
Right.
But I kind of got a feel, but it was very interesting. Like there and touch on watching everyone go through the polls and do that. Adequate to make them
Ways to develop things that are maybe better.
but that was in this obviously very clearly, including that department or rebranded part. So I could have just
Arguing with them, you're trying to help somebody.
this is
This is what is better and why you need to evolve.
like a lot of
win your business.
like the agile method, but now
Down
it's
from there too, where they
and one
it was criminal what they did.
person
That was the worst
project manager or
experience of this
project. That's helped a lot because then they can
I'm not sure that was the context.
or they can do the back end of Oregon off like a lot of information.
That was my question. When you said Oregon, I'm like, okay, so that means got it. Because I think all of it's just problem solving, unless it's your case you give, as you make better representation. The rest of it is, and I'm not sure that. I mean, just some guys are more difficult than others.
Or frustrating things for me are like some UX
But it's always how do you
research your
manage expectations?
Oh, yeah, that's so okay, but yeah, we don't have the time or the budget. So let's just like shove it through, and then oh, guess what? Like this isn't working. Things aren't right. You know, if you would have taken the 10, 15, 20, whatever hours ahead of time, research. No, they just want to rush it through because they're already behind the 8 ball. And yeah, guess what? They kind
Well, I
of a
didn't know
lot
if it
of
was for
stuff.
nostalgia.
We started writing a project, and I said, are you gonna do wildlife navigation? I was a project
But
manager
normally
back
for everyone to get
development
bought
side.
out.
So you can do tree tags, card sorts, actually talk to your customers. Oh, no. They were crazy. Now I'm on the other side, I'm a digital marketing
Moved there?
manager. And I'm like, all of this thing, but the
been,
project's already this far down.
In a lot of places. I was very hopefully it's the last.
And then it's too late. Then
Yeah.
they don't go back and fix it.
I live
We're
in
trying to
a
fix it, but
town
we're
called
doing it
BK,
with
which is
customer effort.
west of Austin.
And I think that's a mistake.
About a year. So we're a company called
Okay.
And then
I mean,
you're
they're much
trying
better
to
public. I was down there for a while into it, and so it was kind of one of those
So you want
Why'd you ask them and settle the
I
score?
liked it, so
And then their department
we're like, okay, this is happening, we need to
Right.
get behind it, and if we don't get behind it,
Yeah, and I
we're
find
not going to get behind it.
the frustrating disconnect is
That's where we moved from.
say
No,
that
it's a
you
nice place.
want
It's still
great customer experience, but yeah, you're so focused on the
Say,
bottom line.
I would say that
Like
the
what's
team
more
rallied
important?
and system, and throughout the whole entire thing down in Austin,
put the work up front.
had to open an office in Portland because we couldn't.
Right.
Yep.
Job recruiting gets so much.
Take another minute,
The last few years.
find a wrap-up point.
Or another bad experience I had
Well,
people like
office was up in
in meetings with them who just really aren't connected, like they're kind of there.
A lot of biking out off. I mean, usually we used to go out there. I don't know if you're a biker or rider.
Or maybe they're like
Used to be that was great. You could get away, and then it was like, oh my God, you can't be. You can't go out there because you couldn't get back.
Question no matter what.
6:20 and somebody became a violation.
right, yeah. But they're valuable. Their value is crazy projections.
Right.
Yeah. We've all had some of
We all
that.
have the same people.
I have one of my best friends also was last week, and
Or I mean,
they actually were
a lot
saying
better
it
than
wasn't bad
water.
commuting
Yeah.
during the day trying to get
My
over.
organization
He's in
is, there's a couple of us that have done
I don't know how
agile,
they could even be.
not
It was never good.
everyone.
I used that on book meetings like you were in San Francisco. Right? You go to one-on-one or
Stop and take them all and
you planned it, right?
You need to document everything.
Find a stopping point if you can.
It sounds
Kind
familiar,
of
but
why
I
I
couldn't.
left that department. I can't go back to waterfall.
Any
I can't go back to
group
writing.
or person wanna
Tons and
share?
tons of business
their
requirements.
the group, remember Chatham House rules,
It's a safe space.
safe space. I'll make Jordan call on people.
Yeah, we will definitely call on people.
No one's got a good war story to share?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Good.
Brave
Awesome.
volunteer.
Hi. So example I brought up is so I'm part developer, part UX, and so have a little bit of both sides of it. So when dealing with potential clients, we end up having this is the project that we have. This is the sorry. This is the project that we have. This is the end goal that we're having, and you have it on this timeline. And so we in our department switched to the Scrum model or the Agile model to help with that, and so that helped out a lot with that type of timeline-based thing. But a lot of it is sometimes we've had to go through projects about halfway through, like, oh well, now we want to do this, and so we're informing them that now we got to go back no, but we got to keep this timeline. But so it's kind of a
So the goal is shifting mid-project,
Yes.
but the timeline is staying the same.
Yes.
And it sounds like people are kind of using the cover of Agile to be like, oh, we can change whatever we want except for the deadline.
we're using the agile saying that this is what it is, but now your timeline's going to have to maybe shift, or we're going to have to
Yeah.
take some stuff out in order to meet that. So it's kind of that work in progress. We're working with it right now. But this,
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we get another volunteer?
Another volunteer?
Someone from that back? Heard a lot of interesting
talk at
chatter
the
at
back
this
table.
table. We know you guys have stories.
I'll volunteer one recently.
Hello.
Yeah, I was working with an organization, and my primary contact stated that he had buy-in from the C-level exec, and he was an SVP. And so we met with him and the VP of marketing for this organization, and started the MSA, had that in place, actually began the work, and what they neglected to bring in IT very early on. And of course, when IT found out about the project, and this company builds product, and they were like, oh, it was just so offended that the technology decisions that were made, that they weren't in the loop, that it pretty much ended up scrapping this entire project.
So you had stakeholders with the ability to sync a project, and nobody included them at the beginning, so they felt
Yes.
left out.
Yeah, and this is after 6 months of planning and strategy meetings, and
Oh, fun.
yeah.
Thank you. Anybody
Anyone
else?
else?
I just thought of one that I forgot to share. At a job I had many years ago, I'm a designer, and I think we've all had the experience where you present designs and then people start redesigning it in the meeting based on personal preference and bias and really no insider research. And I once had someone at the C-suite level come to me. They had used PowerPoint to design the website, and were like, this is what we want, and you gotta bring this to life. And it was like a really bad non-designer website via PowerPoint.
So decisions or direction based on sort of highest paid person in the room
Right.
versus data, research, insights.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Anyone else?
Feels good to get it off your chest.
Can we all sort of relate to these three stories that were shared?
Does this feel familiar to people?
Feel common, feel sort of like we have these common themes and war stories and problems again. And all the issues outlined here are very similar to issues that we see and common problems we see with the clients we work in. And particularly with the clients that we work with regard to personalization. So we're going to walk you through some of the common themes, people-related themes that we all encounter through the course of our efforts. So he talked about not having the right stakeholders in the room. A lot of times we have too many cooks in the kitchen, right? You show up to a review when you thought was maybe 2 or 3 people, and boom, it's a 20-person meeting, all right? And what does this do, right? This leads to difficulty getting stakeholders to align together, lengthy meetings where you're sort of spinning your wheels, time wasting, potential duplication of efforts, multiple amounts of amends and revisions, which obviously increases costs. And it's our job to prevent not only too little people being in the room, but too many people being in the room. We are the gateholders, the stewards for the projects that we're doing. We're going to talk when we get to this section about a tool and technique and a few strategies for how to get at this too many cooks or too little cooks in the kitchen.
Competing goals. Studies tell us, and human behavior tells us, that people behave how they're measured. And when you're personalizing, you're bringing together, or at least we think you should be bringing together, a pretty cross-disciplinary group, right? But when everybody's measured by something different, it's hard to know which direction to go in. People get motivated by different things. IT has different KPIs than the design team, than the marketing ops team, than the content team, and yet they all have to work together on this one goal of personalization. And they might not even be using the same language. We were at a sales meeting not too long ago when a client said, oh, ask us how many different definitions we have of a daily unique visitor. Fascinating. Everybody there had their own different view of what the data meant. So they couldn't even agree on their terms. So this can lead to everybody, as you can see, moving in different directions, or maybe even pushing their own agendas, or starting to treat work like a zero-sum game, where if you win, that means that my goal loses. But really, as we all know, I think personalization takes collaboration to truly be effective. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can get past this one too.
So number 3 is egos. Your story exemplifies that to a T. When sort of this person shows up in the room and has the ability or the potential to blow things up or to drastically alter the course of the project, mainly based in just again pure opinion or desire. And so what do egos also sort of create potential infighting amongst your product team or between departments? IT hates marketing, sales hates product. We've all heard that story. Potentially people pulling rank for political gain versus user-centered or data-driven decisions, biased feedback, obstruction and go slow. Someone could purposely holding up your project or throwing roadblocks in your way, and also just making changes because I have to have an opinion and I have to make my mark.
I made a mark on this project. Was it valuable? No. And a lot of these decisions are actually led by fear. So quick show of hands. If your last project at work went perfectly, please raise your hand. You are dismissed from the rest of law. Nobody? Okay, great. Therefore, I think that leads to something interesting, which is that we tend to bring with us our emotional baggage from our last project to our next project. And that often means that we're bringing fear. Here's an example. We're working with a global wellness brand right now that they somehow got themselves onto 2 different CRM systems. And we were working on a project to get them to move to one. And everything was going great. And we did data mappings. And we were all set to go. And it was going to increase productivity. And at the last minute, one group of stakeholders said, well, we don't want to do it. We want to keep the system we know. Okay, so we dig into this a little bit, and it turns out that last year their IT team presented them with a new email marketing tool that nobody had actually talked to them about what their needs were for, or how they were going to use it, or whether or not it was the right tool. And they got so burned by that experience that now even when we're doing things the right way, they are extremely hesitant to take on a new system because they got burned so bad last time. So fear can really lead to non-strategic decision making. And there's plenty of fears to choose from, right? When you're personalizing, there's the fear of change, there's the fear of upsetting the boss or maybe the CEO. Oh, no, we're not going to match the way that this vision has been laid out. Or fear of something new that people don't understand. Not all of you geniuses here, but you might work with people back at the ranch who don't fully understand all the aspects of personalization and yet are being told every day by everything they read. Oh, if you're not personalizing at scale, you're leaving money on the table and you're going to get left behind. And that can be really scary to admit that. So all this fear that comes with people is really going to lead to some terrible decision making. But you can work around it. Premature partying. Sorry about that. There's a woman named Bree Groff of SY Partners has a great article where she talks about the different kinds of grief that accompanies change, even at work. And in fact, I would say it's harder at work because at work we don't often use words like grief or even acknowledge that we have emotions about our work that we do. But the fact is that change can really mean loss. And she talks about different types of loss people face when they're going through a change at work. There's loss of control, loss of time, loss of competency. Right? You used to be seen as an expert, and now suddenly things have shifted. You have to know about this new thing, and you don't really know about it yet. But as leaders tend to want to focus on the great, shiny new thing, this beautiful, scaled-up personalization future that we're all going to be a part of. It's all going to be so great. And we run the risk of celebrating that new thing before we acknowledge the loss of the old thing. And it can be really hard for people to come with you on that journey if you haven't taken the time to acknowledge what came before. Right? People will not be willing to join you if they're resisting unacknowledged loss and they're sort of stuck in the past because of that.
So now that we've shared some war stories and we've talked about some common people problems, we want to share with you some actual tools that we've had success with when faced with these problems with our clients and even within our own company. And the first one I want to talk about is stakeholder mapping, which pulls from so many disciplines: UX, design thinking, project management, change management, innovation frameworks. And what a stakeholder mapping is it's the process that helps you identify, analyze, map, prioritize, strategize, and around your stakeholders. And that's a lot to say. We're gonna walk through how one does, an example of how to do stakeholder mapping. But so the first step is you need to identify who your stakeholders are. And you want to generate a list. And so common questions to ask yourself is, on whom will this project have the biggest impact? Who do we need to be actively involved? Who will want to be actively involved? Who can hijack this project or derail it or kill it? Who has authority over the budget, the platform, the subject matter? Who can be a champion to affect change we need? Who's going to set goals and visions? Who will benefit from this project? And who else in our organization shares similar goals? And these are just an example of questions, and you'll have to develop your own list, but the first step is to develop a list. And then you want to do a mapping around, this is an example, but 3 categories: impact, influence, and interest. And I'm gonna use an example, and hopefully you guys, most people in this room have seen this show, but I'm gonna use Mad Men as an example for a stakeholder map. Everyone here seen the show? Raise a hand. Okay, good chunk of people. Hopefully you guys, it's an ad agency. Sterling Cooper we'll get to. We're going to assume for this stakeholder mapping that we're this guy, Ken Cosgrove. Does anyone remember what his job title was? He was an accountant. He was an account exec. He wasn't the high, he wasn't the low, but he was in the middle. And let's just say that Ken wants to start a personalization practice at Sterling Cooper. And the first thing he's going to do is he's going to develop his list of stakeholders, right? So I didn't map everybody out here. I took Betty Draper off the list because she doesn't really have a say in how the agency operates. And what he's going to do, and if we had time, we would do this activity together and we'd have a debate about, from a scale of 1 to 5, how people fall in these categories. But since we only have 25 minutes left, I'm just going to do it for us. And they're going to map each character across these categories of impact. How does this impact their day-to-day? What influence do they have with regards to this project? So how can they kill this project? Can they make this project happen? And their interest in the project. And we've got Roger Sterling and Bert Cooper, who are the founders, to people who are on the ground, the Peggy Olsons, the chief operation officer, Joan Holloway. And what you'll find is that when you reorganize these based on, so you score them 0 to 5 in each category, you sum the score, and then you rank them in terms of low, medium, and high from a rating perspective based on their score. And shockingly, what you'll find when you reorganize them based on this score is the people who are high on this list and medium are not maybe the biggest names in the room, right? Roger Sterling, the head of accounts, the founder, pretty low here, and that's because while he can kill the project, it doesn't really impact his day-to-day, and he's not really interested in it, right? He's more interested in taking clients out for, 3 martini lunches and, smoking cigarettes and stuff like that. But you'll find that it's Peggy Olson and Harry Crane, Peggy the copywriter, Harry Crane the media guy, who are really high, and Lane Price, who's the chief operating officer, and Bertram Cooper, the founder, that are sort of ranked higher in this list. And Joan Holloway, of course, interested because it's the future of the company, big influence, but not a day-to-day impact. So, and look, Don Draper, who's like the main character, he's shockingly medium, right? He's the head of creative. Why is he a medium? And that's because, he can influence and he's interested in it, but he's a big ideas guy. He's not this on the ground thinking about personalization. And so once you do this, hopefully your slides will load, and sort of spinning. Okay. So what you're going to do is then you're going to develop engagement strategies for these different people. And those engagement strategies are going to be specific to that person. And you're going to assign a person on your team to be with that person. So, for instance, Peggy Olson and Harry Crane, they're going to be on your project team. They're the people who are going to actually get this work done. They're going to push this forward. And you're going to talk about different things with each of them. So while Peggy wants to talk about how, or you're going to speak to her saying, this is the direction of the future of the company, this is how we're going to provide excellent work. Harry Crane, on the other hand, he cares more about how this is going to elevate his position and ultimately make his money. And then you talk about some of these other people who are sort of higher level, Lane Price. You're gonna be at the monthly budget meeting with Lane Price, and you're gonna speak to the ROI of personalization. You're gonna speak to the ability to grow client budgets, because that's what he cares about. He's reporting back to London. He's gotta show the needle being moved. Bertram Cooper, on the other hand, you're gonna have an account meeting every 6 months, but you're gonna emphasize the future that this brings. This is the way for Sterling Cooper to stay competitive, innovative. That's what you build your legacy on, because that's what he cares about. And again, we won't go through all of these. Roger Sterling, like I said, you're updating on progress over martinis and steaks every 2 months. So, different ways of communicating and different talking points to these different stakeholders. And hopefully our slide will load again, but maybe not. It's just spinning. Cool. Well, if I can draw some quadrants. Is there a pen around here?
There's markers at the whiteboard.
So another thing to keep in mind, because there are markers, is that time is limited. You don't have all the time in the world to focus on all these stakeholders. But if you could draw quadrants, and let's put interest and influence. You're gonna map your stakeholders along here. High. Right? In here, this area, people who have low interest, low influence are gonna be your Pete Campbells, right? He doesn't really have a lot to say. Let's just say we're at the beginning. Don't ruin the show for everybody about what happens to Pete. But let's just say that he's got a he's low influence, right? This is Pete Campbell. Well, he's fine. So he's got low influence. His interest, not super high, but he's interested because he thinks that what you're doing is gonna take away from him. He's a kind of he's worried that you're gonna look good and he's gonna look bad. So his interest is probably in this 2 to 3 area. Let's just put it there, right? You're not gonna spend a lot of time on Pete Campbell, right? Because he doesn't have a lot of influence, he's not really interested in you. You're gonna monitor him, right? You're gonna make sure he's up to no good, he's not backstabbing you. Maybe you assign Harry Crane in to talk with him at the water cooler, see what he thinks about what you're doing. You're not gonna spend a lot of time on him. Now, let's talk about Bertram Cooper, right? He's got a high influence, but he's only mildly interested, right? He's sort of looking towards the legacy he's building. He's like right here, right? Joan Holloway, not same, sort of mild interest, a little bit less influence, right? And then we'll put Don Draper here. Lane Price, the money man, right? Medium influence, interest, right? This is where you focus your efforts, right? These are the people who have the influence and the interest, and you want to focus your efforts and your comms plan on these guys. Because these guys, these are your latents, right? But these guys you can move to be your champions, right? So if you're going to spend your time, focus on these guys, right?
Any questions on what you just saw?
Anyone doing this?
Does anyone do stakeholder mapping?
And sorry, you do?
With a couple nodding heads.
And while we showed you stakeholder mapping in like charts and stuff like that, it doesn't have to be that formal. Actually, one of the slides we couldn't load is just Post-its. Moving people around, marking where they are in relation to your project and trying to shift them towards that strongly supporting, moderate support of your project.
Are your slides going to be available later?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Are we back?
Maybe they'll work better for you than they did for us. So.
Okay, right. So now that we mapped our stakeholders and we've talked about focusing our efforts, here are some strategies for engaging different types of stakeholders.
Yeah. Basically, enrollment is the name of the game. You don't want to come across like you're forcing your new program on people. Your goal is to show people inside your organization that personalization is an exciting opportunity for them and for the whole organization, even though it may represent a challenge or a change to the way that they're used to working or the things that they're used to getting measured on. So the specific way you enroll each stakeholder, as you just heard, is going to be kind of unique to them, right, as we saw in the MadMed example. But there are some tips like acknowledging the loss, not partying prematurely, some of these things we talked about previously, and give people a place to air their fears so that they're not carrying them around with them. Try to head off that fear-based decision-making before it starts. You can do this by helping them understand where they fit into the vision and how it builds on what came before and how their work has an impact. If you can show that to people, most people will happily get on board with you. For the people who won't, there are some other things you can do to try to co-opt your critics and turn them into team members. Give them a job to do, right? Invite them into your process. Rebecca gave Peggy and Harry some specific jobs, specific assignments in that stakeholder mapping. Give them something to do to let them feel involved. Interview them as a subject matter expert. Everybody loves to be thought of as an expert, and everybody is an expert in something. Make them part of your research process. Make them feel that they're, basically give their ego a little chance to come out and play so that it doesn't have to get lion-sized and try to derail your whole project. Let them feel heard. By doing this, you might not actually enroll everyone, but by making people feel heard, you can give them sort of a safety valve to let off their steam so that they don't try to do it in the middle of your project and derail you along the way. Collaborate on your goals with people early on. Right? If you can do this with other stakeholders, people will feel like they have skin in the game, like your goals are actually their goals. And you can do this by showing how your goals for personalization map to the overall organizational goals, to show people that just by working here, we're working for the same thing. This can help really surface and alleviate that competing goals problem, so you get some of that information out early on. Also, be open about your progress. Acknowledge early on, personalization is a lot of experiments for the most part. It's very similar to A/B testing. It's a lot of running experiments to see what you can learn. So use those experiments to generate interest. Post up your information publicly at the office. Tell people what you're learning from each one. Make it seem like a fun, interesting learning process that people can come along with. Right? And acknowledge competing priorities as you go. Acknowledge your failures. Acknowledge pretty much everything that you can. The more open you are, the less people can accuse you of working behind closed doors and trying to keep them out of the process, and that can really cut down on their fear, make people feel a lot more relaxed. Report out regularly and ask for input. It's not a promise that you will use the input, but it can make people feel heard, and you can consider it a research project. Psychological safety. Is anybody familiar with this term? All right. A couple of head nods in the back. It's coined by Amy Edmondson in 1999, and there's a quote, great quote from her, where she says, "Psychological safety is not about being nice. It's about giving candid feedback, openly admitting mistakes, and learning from each other. It means creating an environment where people feel comfortable taking risks together and where it's okay to fail and to learn from your failure. It's actually been shown to be a key component of teams that are highly innovative, able to take risks together, and able to react flexibly to change. And it really relies on two core things, which are vulnerability and empathy, which happen to be great personalized for them. I would also just add on a personal note that everybody, I think whoever named these things soft skills, never tried to use them at work. It's harder than it sounds, but it will really pay off. And it's the kind of behaviors that you can model even if you're not in charge, and can really start to have a ripple effect on the people around you.
Okay. So that's a lot. We went through a lot in 40 minutes, not even 35 minutes.
Working fast.
What have your experiences been with any of the topics we've just talked about? So someone's doing stakeholder mapping. I don't know if they care to share sort of how that's working for them, or have any of these worked for you? If not, why? What else would you add to this list?
I know that when I'm working through digital projects, I know based on the people that I work with and the different people at leadership that I need to make sure that I'm including our leadership in IT as well as our leadership in marketing, and communicating that through across, and just being able to making sure that I'm bringing everybody in from the beginning, and also communicating with other members on marketing when they're trying to hey, let's go do this, and it's like, okay, make sure that you bring IT along for that, because they are very exactly like it was brought up in that example is they will quickly squash a project if they believe that they are responsible for anything and that they will squash it, so.
I mean, when the balance of ownership kind of shifted of the tech stack from the IT team to the marketing team over time, that kind of, some IT teams felt left out in the cold, and it's easy, I think, for marketers to sort of plow ahead without them, but exactly, it's not like they're not there anymore. They are key to your project success. So bring them in from the start, get that stuff out in the open early on. Anybody else? Thank you. Has anyone had a resolution to one of the stakeholder problems that you shared earlier? How'd you get past it?
Ours was actually using the Agile and Scrum model and sending our stakeholders, who we know would be the decision makers, to Agile training project managers. So they are now the funnels for their groups to bring whatever ideas that they've hashed out first to projects that they have in mind for us. So that's been very, very helpful to have that funnel person be the front and center person for us to gain their ideas, rather than having a lot of different ideas come at us more or less at one time.
So you've got like a representative for each.
You have one representative for each person. If they're working on a project and these two people from these departments have a stake in it, they're gonna be responsible for being in there. And if anybody tertiary people come in or need input, they're responsible for handling that and then bringing those ideas in. So
Nice.
it's been
You've
helpful.
got a buffer.
Yes, the buffer between them. And we know a roadmap, a strategy, and what we're going to develop in that time frame.
Awesome. Please, love this too.
So in addition to, we haven't done stakeholder mapping, but we do stakeholder interviews at the kickoff, I think, which is key, because I think, like you said, it brings that inclusion. They can give their voice, they're the SME on it, right? But also I think from us to understand, it's helpful to understand where they're coming from, for us to have empathy. What are their goals? What are their pressures? What are they getting maybe from the CFOs, from the C-suite way? So I think that just helps to know that, what are their goals, and that they understand we're listening to them.
That's awesome. Yeah, sometimes talking with these people actually will reveal really interesting and useful information for your project. Great, thank you. Are you from the back tables? Every project has gone perfectly for you all? Is that why you all sat together?
Very similarly, this is a company that I worked with before, not my current one, but we had a migration of our web property to another platform. And we had a lot of silos of different web resources throughout the company based on the types of memberships that we had. Very similar to the Agile method, we determined which stakeholders could sync us, and they may not have been in that first quadrant, that top quadrant or two quadrants there, but they had the ability to elevate the conversation up to those folks without the key information that would be necessary to make a proper decision. They would hear just bits and pieces that one person's talking about. And that person would torpedo potential projects. So we did a lot of work with them to say, number one, we have representatives from each of these groups that will be the person who is responsible and is only able to talk to us. So that was really helpful in culling that herd of people across 18,000 pages on a website. Yeah, it was a lot. And then also making sure that we we were able to feed that information back to those multiple teams that thought that they were the most important on the web property, which everyone thought that. But then making sure that those top groups didn't all of a sudden get that information and then torpedo what we were trying to do when they didn't get clear information from their stakeholders. So.
Right. Yeah. Like these guys down here. I think these are just talking to the group that you're speaking. So they're maybe not highly influenced, but they're maybe interested. These are the people you keep informed, right? These are the people who are going to trickle up. So you're right. So like the Burt Coopers, Don Drapers have sort of heard about this before it maybe gets to them. That's right.
Yeah. And if you're not keeping people informed, they will eventually just make up their own story about what you're up to and then share it freely. I think I saw a hand go up at this table. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I have more of a question. So sometimes I feel like when we interview stakeholders of understanding their priorities on projects, we run into they want to be told what they want more than they want to be asked what they want. So how do you balance that without making it seem like, how do you still get what they want and understand and interview them and understand their priorities without seeming like you're going and asking them what to do?
So I think what I hear saying is when you're interviewing your stakeholders, they're not sort of explicitly stating their goals or visions, or you have to sort of draw
They'd
that.
rather have a recommendation, I feel like, from us. They would rather have us come in and say, this is, we have these 3 recommendations, rather than openly and conversationally saying, we wanna just know from you, brain dump, what your priorities
So they want you to come to the table with an approach,
Yeah.
Versus sort of have them tell you said approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fairly, I wouldn't say common, but that definitely happens, people need direction or really aren't sure maybe how to handle, like in the case of personalization, it's really new to a lot of people, so they're unsure of what their role and responsibility should be. And so I think, part of the stakeholder mapping is, we said give people jobs to do, is coming up with that job to do. So we gave Harry and Peggy jobs, assignments related to, Peggy was gonna, you saw her, she would be down here, she was gonna be assigned to Don Draper, right? And what was, she was gonna inform him of what's going on, versus Harry was gonna be, I think, assigned to, I can't remember, but like, he had a job to do. And then even Roger Sterling, the Martini Man, he, we were gonna manage him by giving him specific asks for what we wanted to do, despite him being a founder, right, and being in charge. He needs direction, right? So I think that's fairly common.
For those groups, and I think it's okay to come to them and say, we think that here's what we're gonna need from you. Give them something to react to. Even if you know that you're getting it wrong, it gives them, because the blank page can be terrifying for people, or the question, hey, what do you want out of personalization? But if you come to them and you're like, we think that this is how you guys should play a role in this, and this is what you're likely to get out of it, please poke holes in it, tell us where we're wrong, then that often will open the door, because people, it's hard to deal with the blank page, but it's easy to tell someone what's wrong with their idea. We have about 5 minutes. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share, or a question you'd like to ask? Yes?
I was curious about if you guys use the RACI model with the responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, and just how does that fit?
I feel like
with some
RACI
of
is
the
kind of
other
like a proto-stakeholder map.
Yeah, so we have done RACIs in the past. I'm gonna give you my personal perspective on RACIs. I think, as opposed to stakeholder maps, I think oftentimes RACIs get created and then forgotten, or not even looked at. And our professional experience is that stakeholder mapping is a much more adaptable, it allows for more evolution for it to travel with you than a RACI, which is sometimes just a checkbox. Oh, we do a RACI, like, yeah, no one ever looks at it or keeps to it. I will say with stakeholder mapping is it's not something you share with everybody. This is something, so for instance, like we wouldn't show our strategies to the actual stakeholders, but we have to be selective with who you share it with and how often you're revisiting it, and that's going to come on sort of how often you revisit it is going to depend on your project cadence or your time and bandwidth.
Log us back in.
I can log us back.
Great question. Anybody else? It is up, I think. Nope. Well, you'd be seeing our names. Actually, no. Oh, yeah, we'd be seeing a great quote about personalization here. Sorry about the technical issues. I'll just read it aloud, unless you want to write it on the whiteboard. There's a quote from Gerald Weinberg, who has written over 50 books on the software development process. And the quote is, no matter what the problem is, it's always a people problem. I believe that very strongly. We're all human. Everybody is really trying their best for the most part. So I'd say a big takeaway from this kind of work that I've had is just try to be understanding with your teams, especially with those really kind of needle in your side stakeholders. There's something that's making them act that way. And I think some of these tools can help take that pressure off of them and give them a more productive way to work with you on something new. And try to be understanding with yourselves. It's okay to make mistakes when you're doing something new. And you can make it okay to make mistakes by acknowledging that openly early on. Make it just part of the way you work, is that we learn from our mistakes and we talk about them out loud. That can go really a long way towards getting people on board with you.
All right, so hopefully we've provided you with some insights into the people issues at the heart of personalization and some useful strategies, tools, techniques to help you address and tackle them. there's so much more for us to unpack here and only a limited amount of time. So please come find me, Rebecca, or Jordan, or one of our colleagues, Johanna or Brent. And we'd happily love to dig in more and talk more about people problems that you're currently experiencing and how you're working through them.
Thank you for sharing your lunchtime with us.
Quick question. You mentioned the possibility of getting the slides.
Sure.
How would
Yes.
we do that?
That's a great question.
That is a question that I don't know the answer. We don't know the
Okay,
answer
but
to.
we will work with the
we
conference
will work with the
organizers
conference
to make sure that they end up wherever such things are
They're in
posted.
the app.
Wonderful, thank you.
They're in the app?
They're in the
Yeah,
app.
Karen says they're in the
Great
app. Or they
question.
will be in the app.
They will be
Yeah.
in the app.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Graceful recovery from all of this.